All right, let me clear something up real quick. One of my audience members in another video said that the PS5 Pro is pretty much comparable to about the 4070, but if you wanted to build a PC on a spec to spec level that would actually compete with the PS5 Pro, would cost you about $1,400. I presume that they were talking about performance, so I showed my trusted $650 build that's beat the PS5 that I paid $650 for, of which when the PS5 Pro, comes out, we'd have to see what would need to be changed here to be able to get us that number. I don't think much would need to be changed because this CPU already is a beast. But if, say, they clock the speed of the PS5 Pro and it's close to the Ryzen 5 5500, of which I don't think that's the case, simply because we have the Series X kit. This is Digital Foundry's analysis on a CPU that is basically the same as the Series X. And we know that the Series X was better than the PS5's, CPU. And after looking at even that compared to the 3600, the Series X kits, or the 4800S basically, its CPU could not match. But I'll leave that until we get the specs of our PS5 Pro. In looking at it though, this audience member of mine is saying, well, we haven't seen or factored in a lot of these different aspects like advanced ray tracing, AI-driven upscaling, USB-C, and all of these other periphery like 2 TB storage and Wi-Fi 7. Okay, now I haven't looked into actually what would make the build be capable of doing these things from an internal perspective, but in reality, you can always buy yourself a Wi-Fi dongle. I'm not going to bother looking at that simply because even if we say that these particular items, in adding them to our build, let's say they all cost an extra $200, I would still be at $900 for this particular PC. But if you're building for performance, which is what the PlayStation 5 was actually advertised to do, you wouldn't really worry too much about those other things, seeing that you can simply do without them or find cheaper ways to mitigate them. This is where the PC and the console side is very different, and this is where having a PC gives you more of a benefit. So for now, for the sake of just keeping that apart, because again, this is actually, in my opinion, a non-issue, you'll be very surprised how simple this is. Because I see that this audience member of mine is here pasting parts and throwing prices in and asking you to buy a motherboard with a Wi-Fi 7 for piece for $239, when any PC gamer that's building in this range should not be spending $239 on a motherboard. And you have to show me the brand of motherboard, by the way, when you do that. That's why we use PC Part Picker. This audience member of mine said that something about this particular PS5 Pro is that the consensus shows that the CPU should be around equivalent of 4070 to 4090 because it will have or include AI upscaling, which AMD cards do not currently support. But you all are talking about an NVIDIA comparison at the 4070. This is where we should end the discussion, because if you actually, pay very close attention, and I think what's going on is people are listening to talking heads on YouTube. These people they've poisoned the well. Why are they comparing an AMD-based device to an RTX 4070, especially when it comes to its AI upscaling technologies? Because I think a lot of these people understand that with the raw rasterization that can actually come from a 4070 paired up with an appropriate CPU, the PlayStation 5 Pro doesn't seem like it's going to be able to catch that raw rasterization in comparison. It would need the AI upscaling, just from what y'all are saying about this AI upscaling and PSSSR. That's what y'all are basically, you're leaning on PSSSR. That's what you're doing. But we never use upscaling to judge the power and the capability of any hardware as the baseline. That is an added bonus to it. So now that y'all are saying the equivalence of a 4070 to 4090, you must now follow the rules of a 4070 and a 4090. So what are the rules in question? Let me show you. Right here is Gotham Knights running at 4K 60 FPS. My OBS, when it's on, it's going to eat some FPS. But here are the settings. While you have basically no upscaling on, you pretty much have your ray tracing off. And for the most part, you're running at the highest of everything except low environment density, which I've noticed reduces a little bit of pop-in for me. ray tracing makes the game look actually quite beautiful at the end of the day. So let me put ray tracing on, because you do have ray tracing in regard to the console version. I told somebody to do a test. I said, hey man, do you want to do a test? Because they said, oh, if you turned off ray tracing, the game will run at 60 FPS on console. And I was like, okay, if you really want to do that, why not go ahead and test? They say they have a PC. So I said, go ahead and turn on and turn off ray tracing and see if, you can gain 50% more frame time full. Let me show you guys what these performance metrics actually, I'm going to turn on ray tracing as well. The performance metrics basically come, they're actually read by looking at your frame time, not necessarily your FPS. Your frame time actually does affect your FPS significantly. So let's go ahead and turn on ray tracing, and then let's look at our frame time. Our frame time is right now at 16.6 millimeters per second. That's where you get 60 FPS every time. If you've noticed, when ray tracing was off and when ray tracing was on, it didn't necessarily change the frame time much. Now, yes, this is an RTX 4090 build, and so it's running at 4K 60. Can a PS5 Pro render at 4K 60 a game like Gotham Knights? That's how we start the conversation. Then we look at a 4070 and say, what is a 4070 capable of doing with Gotham Knights? Is it able to do 1440 60 with Gotham Knights? If it can, then we ask and say, on the base level, can a PS5 Pro render 1440p 60 FPS on Gotham Knights? Or we use other video games to test what that capability is. But judging that the CPU of the PlayStation 5 Pro is very similar to the CPU inside of the Series X, maybe slightly powerful, it's going to be challenging to see how it will render a lot of these games without any upscaling at that metric. So thereby, in a pound for pound, apples to apples comparison of base rasterization without any upscaling, if the PS5 Pro cannot match the 4070, then everybody who's been claiming and running with this news is basically running with faulty information, and they've inadvertently deceived a lot of people into thinking the wrong thing. So this is exactly where we are from a performance perspective. So AI upscaling and saying that that's going to basically give you the performance of what has been promised to you is not a sound metric to use to actually judge the hardware that you're buying. It's not how we judge PC hardware. It's not how we measure PC hardware against each other. Another thing too is the core count of the CPU, because I've seen that you've actually referenced that in this video. You said that if you wanted to build a PC, you'd need an 8-core 16-thread CPU, because in the video that I made, I showed you the Ryzen 5 5500, which is a 6-core CPU. And so most people who are not really, in my opinion anyways, accustomed to the way PC hardware works on a dedicated versus APU system, think that when you look at 6 cores and, 8 cores, because 8 cores is more cores, hence 8 cores should perform better. However, when they took the Series X, kit, the 4800S desktop kit apart, which has that 8-core 16-thread CPU, you can see that a Ryzen 5 3600 is better than it in multiple applications and in different games. It's actually faster, even though it's got a lower core count. So what's going on here? This is worthy of the explanation. On a dedicated CPU, its cores and its thread and its technology and the way that it runs is significantly better than an APU. It does not need to share too many resources. That's the most simple way I can actually explain it. And it's actually the simplest way I do understand it. Because if I build a PC with a 2060 and I run it against my 2060 laptop, that 2060 PC desktop is going to perform much more stable than the 2060 laptop, simply because resources are handled differently in two components of that nature. So the PS5, the Series X, PS5 Pro will follow those rules and will usually find itself where it performs much lower in terms of specs. In fact, it was this particular paradigm that Digital Foundry was able to find out that Starfield could run at 60 FPS in many places in the game. So when the developers finally got the game to run at 60 FPS, it wasn't out of reach. As many people may have been blaming Todd Howard, saying, Todd Howard, ha 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 ha. He was right. The game was running at 60 FPS in some places, and Digital Foundry got to test it a little bit. So when the patch came out, it was based on the hardware and its capability to do so. It's just that their game just needed more optimization. That's basically what he didn't say. That was the omission that he actually made in the whole grand scheme of things. So when we now look and say, okay, can we get the 40s? Can we get this so-called performance of a PS5 Pro with $700? And the answer is yes. Then again, all the other peripheries don't necessarily matter. Do you understand what I mean? Because the PS5 Pro was advertised as something that would bring performance as the very first thing to the table. Wi-Fi 7 is all loaded and added behind on the back end. So let's look at the performance metrics first. And let's say that, okay, this whole 8-core 16 thread, if we wanted to do 8-core 16 threads, we'd have to bring, you know, that CPU inside of a PS5 Pro, and it's just not going to be fair. It's not a good competition, because if you look at the Series X kit, when they were looking at the 8-core 16 thread comparisons, it was way past what the 4800S could do. And they haven't even told us by what percentage the PS5's CPU is going to be even performing. They've only given us the GPU to render clearer and, you know, better picture quality and all, and so on and so forth. So there's much that's still left in the conversation that, yes, as much as we don't have in terms of the PS5 Pro, we already see the PC equivalents. And to be very honest, it's very interesting that people are still, you know, making this comparison and are very confident in making this comparison. I wouldn't do that if I were you. The final piece of this is you're comparing an AMD-based device to an RTX-based device. An RX, 6,000-7,000 series is a fundamentally different, technology piece than an RTX device. Even a GTX and an RTX, everybody already knows that that's actually different. An RX 20 series and an RX 40 series are fundamentally different. 30 series and 40 series have slight differences as well. So it's hard for you to make those comparisons without finding out exactly where the differences are. But when you jump even to AMD across the pond, then it's a whole different conversation. And the PS5 is an AMD-based device. The RTX is an NVIDIA-based device. So how do you know how their upscaling is going to measure? What level of AI upscaling has been done in the PS5 that NVIDIA has not necessarily sat there and, banged out an equivalent or a more superior version? We don't know. So we don't even necessarily want to bother with upscaling. We just want to see raw rasterization and what it can upscale to. And then here's the final piece that I think is probably going to, in a sense, put this to rest, in my opinion. If the PS5 Pro cannot match the base rendering of a 4090 or 4070, as you say, then what is it going to upscale to that's going to give a better quality than what the 4070 or 4090 can upscale to in its own right? What I mean by that is, let's say the PS5 Pro has to render a game at 1080p and then upscale it to 4K to give you 4K 60. If the 4070 can already render the game at 1440, when it upscales it, what do you think the performance is going to look like? It's probably going to be better than the PlayStation 5 Pro if they cannot render base resolution, raw resolution without any upscaling on the same level playing field. And this is where I think a lot of people need to be very careful when they're drawing these conclusions. Because the hardware in both devices are just different hardware. And a lot of folk are not too aware of exactly what it is that they're actually comparing. So when they make these comparisons based on what somebody said on the internet or what they perceive, it's very dangerous. Very dangerous. Because you end up paying money for something that you don't really know how it even works, but you've just been told how it works. Let the PS5 Pro come out. Let the PS5 Pro come out. But if NVIDIA sold you $1,500 worth of technology for $700, then something is happening in the market that we don't know about. So this is why a lot of people are doubtful. They're doubtful. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Appreciate you all so much. Let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. Hopefully we'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.